In this scene, our guy sees one for the first time, so he asks her what it is. The redhead responds that it's not a strong monster at all, so she tells him to step forward and leave the dungeon, even though our guy mentions that he would like to see the battle. She apologizes while pushing him hard to make sure the boy can at least survive. However, the girl also mentions that she may have broken a couple of bones, but she knows she can't afford to be distracted now. She starts dodging the lich's attacks and with a surprising kick from above while wondering how there could be such a monstrous lich in such a weak dungeon. She knows that not even rank W adventurers would stand a chance against this monster, so she reveals that she's just buying some time for Robert to escape. On the other hand, while our guy is flying, not because he wants to but because of the blow the girl gave him, he thinks he would have liked to know more about Key and the dungeon, so by increasing the size of his barrier, he cancels the momentum that was carrying him so far. Once back on solid ground, he thinks about going back to find out why she sent him flying, but unsure, he asks Grim for his opinion. Grim, who is asking for help because apparently the demon is doing very badly. Back with our heroine, she is barely defending herself, and the worst part is that she knows she's going to die here. However, she's relieved that at least Robert managed to escape. Silently, she tries to withdraw, walking slowly, but the lich stops her and reveals that years ago he ate someone who used that key technique, and despite acquiring his knowledge and techniques from this adventurer, he found it to be nothing more than an inferior form of magic. So he tells the redhead that it's not worth eating her, unlike the guy before, who reacted too quickly to his attack. As she listens to his words, she replies that both Robert and him are nothing alike because although they both have the same goal, which is to seek knowledge, Robert is very happy with anything he finds, which made her happy, and although people on the continent treat Key as if it were something inferior, she considers it valuable and worthy of study. But the lich simply mocks her words and attacks her more fiercely. That guy, being very late, told her that she was amazing, and the culmination of these things makes him very different from a certain disgusting lich. Quickly, she launches herself at him with the key to strike, but the bastard puts up a barrier. However, she doesn't care, and while telling him all about her life, she keeps trying to destroy the barrier. At least she manages to push him down, and once there, she doesn't stop and hits him with all she has. With a key energy attack, she manages to destroy the lich's barrier. However, she is now out of strength and unable to move, and to her bad luck, the bastard is on top and mocks her key, emphasizing that the magic he can perform is much stronger, all without lifting a finger. To make her feel even worse, he mentions that she wasted her life, but just as he is about to launch an attack at her, she is saved by none other than Robert, who asks her if she's about to give up. Since she is very surprised, she doesn't respond, so he is asked to handle it. As he's in a hurry, with a very evil smile, he looks at the lich and quickly positions himself behind him, which surprises the monster quite a bit, as he recognizes that spell as Total Sprint, an air-class spell that can't be performed without an incantation, and although the guy tries to catch his breath, it doesn't work, so he takes a moment to think. Taking advantage of this, the lich attacks him, but Robert had already conjured a barrier. While thinking about the combination of key and mana, he surprises the lich by making his barrier very tough, so, remembering the girl's words, he decides to focus more and does so several times while resisting lich's attacks with his barrier. But then he notices that the barrier is hindering his breathing, so he gets rid of it, making the monster think that now is his chance. He taunts him, mentioning that he now sees his limitations as a mage while launching several attacks. But Robert grabs the edge of a rock to propel himself between them and at the same time writes off lich's attacks. Even the girl notices that our guy got rid of his barrier to breathe in more air and channel more powerful ki while trying to mold them together. In one of those attempts, he manages to shape them into a giant ring that repels all of lich's attacks. Although he acknowledges that his first attempt at this attack was weak, he decides to try it more times, aiming at the monster. However, the lich doesn't give in easily and continues to resist, attacking as well. However, the lich is afraid because the boy doesn't even cast spells, recognizing that even the boy's attacks are better than his, as he even manages to graze his face, which is made of bone, and in one of those, our protagonist compresses it so much that now it's thinner. Despite the monster having its barrier, he still manages to cut through it, and finally, the bony one is reduced to dust. With victory in hand, He smiles at the girl because she was already prepared to die. Then, when they open the chest, it turns out there's only a rusty knife, although he notices that it's coated in mana. He asks the girl if he can keep it, and she allows him. Then, the dungeon starts to shrink. The girl tells us that dungeons collapse once the object is collected, so our ambitious friend wants to take the dungeon core to the chest. However, the stone pillars keep falling, and Tao tells them to leave now because everything is coming down. Finally, they leave, and our guy is very amazed at how the girl gradually manipulates the dungeon. He remarks that it has a very interesting mechanism. She mentions that she's very surprised that he's a very talented mage, but asks why he fights with key techniques instead of his magic. Perhaps, just perhaps, the answer is that the lich was mocking her, but to not be left out, he thought it would be fun to use ki. Then he realizes he has to go home and starts to float away. Before he leaves, she tells him that the technique he used at the end is a secret technique called Phyloi, and in his mind, he recognizes that not even she can use it, so she promises to train hard and become a very interesting woman. He thinks it's fine, and as he propels himself with his magic, he mentions that they will improve together, and they bid farewell. She promises to do it to become the girl who catches his eye, but then, when our protagonist is far away, she shouts, asking how she can contact him, but he's already gone. After passing through several places, he arrives home searching for Grim, whom he finds with bumps lying on the floor, even crying and complaining. He asks our protagonist who the hell that mate is. It turns out that Silva, while training him, noticed that his master was now very weak, so she proceeded to beat him up, as she believed there was no other choice but to toughen up his heart to train him again from scratch. And that's why we now see Grim all crying because he couldn't do anything against her, even though he's a very powerful demon. And then, after Grim feels better, he starts examining the knife he brought, reproaching him for arriving too late just for a worthless knife, although for our protagonist, it's an interesting treasure. So, in a fountain, he prepares boiling water to bathe the knife and clean it while removing the magical enchantment it had, and when he holds it, to his surprise, that's mana essence, because with this, you can write formulas on weapons to strengthen or enhance them, and after that, he prepares a test tube to put the enchantments in, shaking and breaking down the formulas it had. But this is not enough to analyze the essence, so he uses a spell to purify the contaminated water and increase its purity, thus being able to separate the elements, resulting in a combination of silver oil and hematite, the latter being monster core powder, which is also a very scarce substance. And at that moment, our protagonist sees the lid of the dungeon core and thinks about extracting something from there. So, Grim understands that they will now need silver oil and a bunch of weapons. So, when our clever protagonist sees his father, he asks for his allowance, but instead of asking for gold coins, he asks for silver ones. With this request, the king thinks his son is humble and wonders what wonderful thing he will spend his allowance on, and well, he was obviously melting all that silver, and as for the oil, his teacher promised to give it to him if he could land a single blow, and although our protagonist tries to use total sprint to increase his speed, and even earth magic, it's not enough, and even though he was defeated, she is still surprised by what he did and gives him the oil he needs, because unlike the previous day, today he did much better. And at the window, Grim was watching her while still complaining that although he didn't use magic, he's surprised that a maid defeated him, and at that moment, Silva mentions that her master has a lot of talent for magic and swordsmanship, so when he grows up, he could become a commander. But then, she reconsiders and says that even the rank of swordmaster would fall short for her master, and then the conversation shifts, but she still motivates him to cook well. After that, we see our protagonist gathering all the ingredients he needed and then asking his older brother to give him some weapons to try out some enchantments. Because he loves his little brother so much, he goes to his guards, and with a face that clearly reflects that if they don't listen, he'll fire them, he kindly asks them to give him their weapons, and everyone quickly complies. Even one of them cries because he had just bought that sword. Everyone knows that enchantments are very difficult to make, even more so if a 10-year-old does it, and Grim, from afar, looks very angry, so He decides to support our protagonist in any way he can. He applies 3 layers of enhancement to the swords and even fills the gaps to enhance their elasticity. Well, on the first try, it breaks, so he tries several more times. While Grim and the copy cheer him on, after many failures, he succeeds several times, taking them all to his brother. Out of the 120 weapons he was given, 50 were successful, while in reality, our protagonist made 80 successfully. But by adding more spells than they could handle, they ended up breaking, obviously, and Sylph is a little disappointed in Lloyd because she thought he would only cook with the oil, and his brother, seeing the sword, mentions that a high-level wizard has a success rate of around 10%, meaning that if a veteran had done it, there would have been only 2 successful ones in the best-case scenario, so he reconsiders and now believes that Lloyd may have more talent than he thought. And then the blonde sees a large sword that catches his eye, while the guards, unable to see the enchantments, think they were brought just as they were, and even go as far as to say that after the boy failed 70 times, he simply gave up. But when he puts it in its sheath, it cuts quickly. Meanwhile, the blonde has already taken the sword that caught his eye, noticing with great amazement that his little brother did an excellent job, and the little one asks him if he would like to use them in a fight. Obviously, his brother agrees. He also mentions that their father has a task for him, which is a monster hunt, so it's a perfect opportunity to test the magically enchanted swords, which makes Lloyd very happy.